Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the differences of temperatures of cold and hot across the United States. So we know that there could be hot weather all over, from the south, even to the north, and to the west. Now what depends on this is the maritime influence and humidity. So can it be hotter and humid in the north than way in the south? It actually can. It just all depends. Now can it be, now in terms of the coldness, people talk about coldness in Denver. People talk coldness of the Midwest and the Northeast, and what makes the difference. The difference is places like Denver and South Dakota, the cold air resides in the mountains. In the Midwest, Chicago, Michigan resides on the lake. And in the Northeast, it resides on the ocean. Now, people always say about the bitterness of coldness of the Midwest. Can it be colder in Denver, say, than in Minneapolis? Actually, it can. It all depends on the shiftness of the winds of the mountains. Denver's a unique weather. You can have extreme weather in Denver. It could be bitter cold, and the next day it could be very warm. Now, I would say the most extreme cold in the United States would have to be in the upper it's past the Midwest, but on the west, such as South Dakota. South Dakota has a very extreme, rapid swing of temperatures. It could be even more than Denver, in a sense. It's high up, way up in the mountains, but it's also close to the ocean. So you're actually having extreme temperatures. It could be 60 degrees and the next day 20 degrees. It could be 20 degrees and the next day minus 15 degrees. South Dakota probably has one of the most extreme weather changes. Now, can it get bitter cold in Florida? Not possibly. The lowest it's ever been in Florida, maybe we're in the 40s. I believe people say the 20s, but that was a way long time ago. It was very extreme, but probably the 40s. So the South can get pretty cold. Alright, it has to also do with the Doppler effect. Now, interesting about Connecticut, the weather there kind of reminds me of Denver from what I read. Denver, it can get a lot of snow, but the sun will melt it very quickly. Whereas Connecticut, it can get snow, but the rain will melt it very quickly. Probably in the Northeast, one of the assumptions, the differences of uniqueness would probably be Connecticut, because it resides on the Atlantic. Sometimes you can get snow, sometimes you'll get hardly any snow. So yes, the majority of the fact of the Midwest, Michigan and Minneapolis, it's always going to be very cold in Wisconsin. But don't rule out that Denver actually had one of the most extreme colds at one time. The difference between the colds in Denver and compared to the Midwest and Northwest with extreme temperature changes, it's an extreme climate with it's high altitude, but you have the mountains and you have desert. So it results in very unique, rapid changes of weather. You can get all 5 seasons in Denver, strangely, coincidentally. It can be raining, snowing, and sunny in one day. And it can be snowing hard, and the next day the snow will be melting, and vice versa. See that the extreme changes of Denver So, and then people talk about, well, it's bitter cold in Montana and Wyoming. So, the farther, so it's a kind of interesting effect. We all know in the top northwest is Canada, and Canada can have very cold winters. And if that air is going down below, it can go all the way to Denver, and obviously in Montana, it's way up there in South Dakota, it can be very, very, very cold. So the weather just all depends. But yes, if you're in Minneapolis and Michigan, yes, it's going to be very cold in the winters. And it's actually can be colder in the top northwest. It just all depends. So we now know that the mountain puts the cold air quicker than a lake because it rises to the top and the condensation keeps falling down. And that's why people say it's even colder than the Midwest. But the lake effect can be very cold as well. People say the Midwest can be colder, but the Northeast can get more snow. Well, it all depends. So I'm glad I can explain that to everybody. Now, not even the southern regions can get cold, even Arizona at some point. It also depends where you're at. There's deserts in Arizona, but there's also cool places. There was a record history of California, which had the all-time record of coldness, Big Bear. California's a wide range state that you can go to the mountains and ski. There's also got desert, and it's got all kinds of weather. My experience living in Denver, I wasn't lucky to get through blizzards. So I was lucky there was no blizzards. But there was a lot of snow, and I remember that. Now the interesting is, even in the Northeast in Connecticut, you don't have to use chains for tires, never. As I was told for people. But in Denver, in some places you do have to use chains because of the rapid coldness. Denver's a nice place to live. It's an interesting place with extreme weather changes. But when you go on the highway, the sun is just blaring out. You're on top of the mountain, but you're also in the middle of the desert in some places. You actually can't see when you're driving, which is actually very dangerous. When I took a trip to New York, since the crowd of the people, it was very humid. Probably actually more than the South. I grew up in Georgia, but I have to say, it was a heat wave when I was in New York City, and it was very humid. Yep, way up the Northeast, it was actually very humid. It was hotter than it was in Georgia. People think because of the higher up is the sun, and it would be hotter. But interesting, that's not how the weather works. The weather works kind of backwards in circular motion. So that's why it's hotter in the lower states. People also say Wisconsin, you can get snow over for months. Wisconsin's a unique place. You have the lake effect, but you can get a massive amount of snow for months and months, which is pretty interesting. Now Seattle, believe it or not, can actually get very cold too. And it can actually be very cold because it rains, and it can actually be frigid cold. Yep, there has been blizzards in Seattle, believe it or not. In Seattle, it's interesting now that because I saw volcanoes. There's a lake of fire. You have volcanoes, and you can get very cold, frigid ice rain. And it's the snow that's not powdered, so it's a bad kind of snow. Kind of interesting, different from the Northeast. So as you can see, there's a wide range of coldness all over the United States and differences.